Legacy. Legacy is something we often only think about after someone has passed on from this mortal life on to the other side of eternity. Usually, when we talk about legacy, we talk about another person. He left a legacy of a good work ethic for his kids, or I want to continue her legacy of compassion for others. However, from a personal standpoint, our legacy is not something that we leave behind. Legacy is something that we live out each day of our lives for the world to see. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, Paul says, "As for me, my life has already been poured out as an offering to God. The time of my death is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race, and I have remained faithful." Paul lived his legacy during his lifetime. He didn't wait for mourners to gather to tell stories of his life, creating some form of legacy. Yeah, I knew Paul, he prayed a lot, or he sure loved God. No, Paul chose to live his legacy. He described it as his life poured out as an offering to God. There was no question of what legacy Paul left behind, because Paul intentionally lived his legacy in his life. There was no question of what Paul stood for, because everyone knew Paul had a living legacy. As far as the world is concerned, our legacy is a remembrance of the actions and values that we live out in our lives. This is what we are remembered by, and these interactions become our legacy. However, if we change the perspective slightly, a potential crisis begins to emerge. Our personal legacy is not an act of remembrance or a reflection. Our personal legacy is instead the highest ideals and priorities in our lives that other people experience. Legacy is not our intention of highest ideals or priorities. It is how others experience or interpret how we live them out in our lives. Our legacy is not something that we leave behind. It is what and how we truly live. If we expect to leave a legacy of faith behind, we must live that faith legacy in our lives for others to experience. It does not matter what we want our legacy to be. If we fail to live that legacy out in our lives, it will never be the legacy that we are remembered by. Because legacy is not something you leave behind. It is something that you live for the world to see. If you want to hear more about defining your legacy and living it out, click on the link below to listen to the podcast of my entire message titled Living Legacy. Subscribe and check out all of my content at myweeklyword.com. I'm Pastor Tim Trometer. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen and watch this video. God bless.